All right, we are right at 2 o'clock Eastern. So welcome everyone. We are here for the aligning instruction to drive student success, thinking about curriculum mapping for impact. This next 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to spend some time looking at the foundational elements of curriculum mapping, the critical role it plays in creating effective student-centered learning experiences, and talk about the whole curriculum mapping process, what it is and what it isn't. Hopefully have some takeaways for you to utilize in your institutions. Well, you can move. Perfect. We're at the agenda. My name is Rachel Havey. I'm a senior director with professional learning at Cognia. I have with me today Dr. Lisa Stone and Dr. Nicole Reeves, also part of our wonderful professional learning team. As I said, we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about curriculum mapping and your classroom, what you're doing. We'll be sharing different things in the chat so we can try to interact with each other, all 300 of us from across the world. We will be thinking a little bit about the foundation of why curriculum mapping really matters and what it can do for our institutions and for our students. Can move that forward, Nicole. As we get started, you're going to see on your screen a few questions, and we are going to send this slide deck out to you all with that recording. And these are some questions that you can utilize when you really start having conversations with your institution, with your teachers about what is happening in the classroom and how do we know what standards we're teaching, how do we access that curriculum, where do we go to find things, what are we looking for when content and skills need to be addressed? Lots of great discussion questions to have with your institution. We're going to start off with a poll that will lead you through similar questions to give us an idea of what you know about what's happening.
You should see a poll option to
Yep.
begin answering. Very good.
See questions, answers coming in.
And we will share results after a little bit.
We like to have the poll to get an idea of what we've got going on, but also share with you some ways that you can have conversation with your teachers and learn where they are so we can kind of level set and know how we can move things forward. One of the questions that we had as a pre-question to this event was, where are you in your curriculum mapping process? And that answer was all across the board. We had some that were in that continuous state of implementation and refinement, really utilizing data and analysis and feedback to drive the work. We had some that, said we are just starting, some that we've been working along and doing it for years and years. Some that said we really need some help. So we know that you will find the same things, most likely with your teachers. We will end that poll here and talk a little bit about the results. So you should see those results, I think. We had knowing what standards should be taught. 100% almost strongly agree with this. So the great majority, just a handful, don't know what standards need to be taught. Having access to a documented curriculum and materials, again, very high percentage, 55% strongly agree and 38% agree. So most of us knowing where to go. I can articulate to students what knowledge and skills they will develop. Also pretty high, 37% strongly agree, 57% agree. I can connect and align assessments to instruction. Again, pretty high there with 36 strongly agree and 57 agree. And then incorporating that wide variety of strategies. This is where that agree comes in a little bit higher. And we've got a little bit number of that disagree. So this is that big piece that we see a lot of questions around. When we think about curriculum at Cognia, we want to also consider our Cognia performance standards. We always connect our professional learning back to our performance standards because we know that this is what supports high quality schools. So when we think about curriculum, we have several standards that are connected to leadership, engagement, and growth. Standard 12, 14, and 16 are all directly related and focused on that curriculum and instruction. And then standard 22, we're looking at a little bit more of how we are monitoring that instruction. And 26, how we're monitoring and evaluating instructional programs. So those are the 5 key areas. And how we're going to do that is through some of the questions that we asked you to start with. So we asked several questions when you registered for this event today. And we found that persistent curricular challenges that you are facing across the world are coming in with thinking about that scope and sequence, how to cover all that content. And there were several that noted not just my individual content, but looking at international and US content, how they align, how we bring them together, some different pieces there, how to maintain alignment for all of the pieces, vertical and horizontal alignment, thinking about differentiating instruction within the curriculum, using technology with curriculum, those cross-curricular activities, and just starting with creating the curriculum. Where do we even go? As I said, you had, we're all over the board with where you were in your process. Every single one of you that registered for this event today, though, said that your school has a process for curriculum development, implementation, and review. So even if you're at the beginning of that process, everyone said there is a process in place, which is exciting. And that last piece, how do we build that capacity? This was very similar across the board, all coming back to really that professional learning piece, whether it's a workshop or a webinar, doing classroom observations and moving from that, having planning schedules, but really working together and collaborating on the work that you're doing with curriculum. So at this point, I am going to hand things over to Lisa Stone to really get into the foundations that we have with curriculum.
Good afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you are. Thank you all for joining us today. I just want to share a little bit of experience around building a foundation for your curriculum and that process. And so let's take a look first at what curriculum is. And you all sound so experienced with your feedback and input, but we'll just take a quick look at knowing that your curriculum refers to the knowledge and skills students are expected to learn. So it's knowing which learning standards or objectives they're expected to meet. It includes your units and lessons and formative assessments. It includes your resources such as videos and reading materials and textbooks. So it encompasses so much when you say the word curriculum. So it's just way more than what are we going to teach and when. And I think one of the most critical parts is having those formative assessments or checks for learning so that we make sure that students are learning. What is it not? Many times we refer to the curriculum as our textbook. And I think if you want to bring those next bullets in, that would be great. So it is not just your standards document. It's great if you have that in hand. It's even better if you've been part of that process because you know your students and their needs more than anyone. It's not just your pacing guide. It is not your program or your textbook. Picking up a textbook and teaching from it, those are great resources or whatever. Maybe you have online and electronic resources that you mostly use. Those are resources for your curriculum. So I love this bottom statement that says curriculum mapping is not set in stone. So what I want to emphasize today is a process. And you all have already alluded to the fact that you know that it is a process. And sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming when you think this is really never complete. We can't checked the box on this, because our students change all the time, and what they need to learn sometimes changes. So I just want to give you a couple of examples um, from some experience that I've had working with at both the system level and at the school level. I had a wonderful opportunity and honor to start a school a few years ago. The very first, and so it was in a system, and the teachers came to our school from all over the system, no more than 2 teachers from any one school. So we all had different experiences and knowledge and backgrounds. The very first thing we did to pull us together as a staff and to ensure that we were meeting the needs of our students was diving into the curriculum process. And we started it the summer before that school opened. And when I left, we were still working on it. And I don't mean to say that in a difficult, frustrating way. It was actually an incredible way for us to ensure that we are providing what we need to for students. But more recently, and this was with the last set of standards, Cognias, before they were revised, we had a system call us one day, and I reside in Kentucky. And so we got a call from a system. One of their improvement themes was that they needed to align their curriculum across the district. I apologize, I don't have the exact wording of that standard with me, but that was the standard, that was their improvement theme. And they're like, we don't know where to start. The important thing is to start. And so we had conversations and planning, and we realized across the system that their schools were not communicating and collaborating together. So we couldn't start there because they were not used to collaborating. So we brought teams from each school together with the principals and teachers representing teachers, and we worked together to set some common goals. Lo and behold, the number one goal that what I love is that the teachers help identify was that to meet the needs of their students, they needed to align the curriculum. So no matter which school a student was going to, they were being taught and ensuring that they learned the same curriculum and standards. So we started there, and then we started the work. We taught everyone in the system. It was a fairly small system, the whole curriculum mapping process, so that when we dove into the work, we were all on the same page. So that was an incredible endeavor, but really worthwhile. And from that, once we were all on the same page with what is a curriculum mapping process, what are the phases in it, can I go back and forth within it? Yes, you can, because it's cyclical, but those arrows can go both ways. And so we came together, and they started the work with ongoing support from us and from some system leaders and coaches to continue that work throughout the year and beyond. The important thing here is that start where you are. And Nicole is going to show you our process, our research-based process, in a few minutes. No, you have to start where you are. Don't put yourself into a mold with this process. Decide where you are as a school or a system and where you need to begin. If you need to begin at the beginning, that's okay. But let's say you have worked through, you have pacing guides, and you've aligned your curriculum horizontally and vertically. We had the chance to do that in that district too, but you don't have common assessments. So you don't have a way to determine if students from one classroom to another are mastering the skills and the knowledge that they need to be successful. So don't think that you have to fit into a mold. Just start somewhere. And so that's kind of the foundation from for what we want to establish today. Once you learn what our curriculum mapping process is. So anyway, if you want to take just a minute in the chat, what do you find most challenging about the process? And I meant to mention, as you're putting things in the chat, sometimes it's identifying your structure. Not everyone has common planning time. Not everyone has grade level teams that are established or subject area teams. What's your structure that works for your institution to accomplish this? So common time has come up, and the time, it can be time consuming. So how do you weave that into the work you're already doing instead of having it be a huge add-on? Getting teachers to actually use the maps that you've established. PLC buy-in. PLCs, that's an incredible place to work on this work ongoing. And the best thing there is the buy-in, like the district I shared with you. The buy-in came because the teachers identified the need to do this work for their kids. So we're seeing a lot of flexibility, alignment between sections, and that's really tough. And to do horizontal alignment may be a little bit easier to accomplish than vertical alignment. I love jump starting and choosing the books. So you all, your answers many are very similar, and some of you are offering some different types of answers of where you are. Again, I just want to emphasize, start somewhere, or if you're already in that ongoing process, evaluate where you are and what you may still need to do. Thank you all so much for putting so many great ideas and challenges in the chat. And I'm going to now turn it over to Nicole to dive into our process.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lisa. Having done so much of this work in the past several years with Cognia, and coming from a background of a curriculum coordinator, I can really understand several of the things that you're putting in as challenges. And the reason why we want you to identify those challenges is for multiple reasons. One, we want you to see that you are not alone, that the challenges are so great in terms of getting this work done. But if you have a process, the process is almost more important than the product. And so it is important that you have these ongoing curricular maps and curriculum maps to guide the teachers, especially as we dive into this world of teacher shortages and teacher turnover. When you get a new teacher, or a teacher moves from one grade level to a next, or a subject level to a different subject level, they need to know and have very quick access to what they're supposed to be teaching. They need to know what students are supposed to know and be able to do. And so we don't want your curriculum maps to be a hindrance. We want them to inspire possibilities. And there are ways to map a real curriculum. And by doing that, you are actually using what the teachers are currently doing in the classroom rather than just starting from the standards. So you can help jumpstart some of your work. For many of you in different school settings or school systems or states, very often your states will identify or create the list of standards that need to be covered. And one of you guys talked about earlier that covering all the standards in 1 year is a problem. And that is true. It's not just about what we want students to be able to know, but it's that problem solving. How can we get them to do that? And so while you may not teach to mastery all the assigned standards of a grade level outlined by the state or a district, you can determine which ones are priority. You can prioritize those standards to make sure that there is mastery in things that must be taught and learned before a student moves or progresses to the next level. You might decide that some of the other standards need to be introduced and maybe dive in a little bit deeper, but not to mastery. And then last but not least, you might want to include other standards in maybe using multiple standards across grade levels. And I'm going to talk about how you could possibly do that. That might inspire a possibility rather than limit your options. But first, I'd like to kind of share with you Cognia's curriculum mapping process. And trust me when I tell you, there are tons of discussions that go around about which one of these things should happen first. And Lisa alluded to this, and I'm going to say this again. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters that you start. So let's just kind of look. This is the whole process, but I want to kind of break down that process piece by piece and discuss some of the concepts for each one. The first thing that's important to understand is that you, as a school or a system, need to decide what is most important for or how you're going to start in putting the student at the center of the learning. It's not just about us feeding information to those students. It's giving the students an opportunity to chew on and work with the content and the skills that you guys deem important. But in addition to concepts and skills, you also want to identify what is important to you and your staff. How much voice or choice are we going to give to students? How are we going to tailor our lessons or plan our lessons that they get the maximum benefit of increased engagement? Because the curriculum is not, remember, Lisa gave you a whole list of things that the curriculum is not. The curriculum is not just what you need to teach, how you're going to teach it, when you're going to teach it, how you're going to assess it, and all of those components work together. So if this is where you need to start, if you've got vision or mission statements or purpose statements that outline your beliefs and important aspects of student-centered learning, then maybe this is not where you need to start. But if you haven't had those discussions with your staff about what you find important and how you're going to put the student in the center, then that needs to happen. This one is often identified for you. For example, you guys need to identify the standards that need to be covered and to what degree. Your state lists those. In many of the states we work with, not only do they list all the standards for each of the content areas and grade levels, but in some cases, based on state performance, they might identify the priority standards for you. In other words, these priority standards need to be taught to mastery. So rather than reinvent the wheel, you can start there, but then you're going to compare your student performance data in every measure that you can gather them, not just summative, but if you've got interim or benchmarks that kind of tie in or align with those standards, you can see if those need to be priority at your site. Because even though the state is guiding us and giving us the information that we can begin our work, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is appropriate for our student population. So you can start there, but then compare to your student performance, and then you will identify those standards and skills that you deem necessary for your student population. Once that is done, and this was a problem area for many of you, is to align and deconstruct all standards. Now, let me just take the word align first. There are lots of different alignments in terms of curriculum mapping, which convolutes things and why so many people don't spend time working on curriculum. You want your curriculum to align vertically. In other words, is every classes, all of the classes in each grade level, are those teachers teaching the same thing or using common assessments to make sure or to ensure that the students who leave that grade level and go to the next are adequately prepared for that next grade level? That's a vertical alignment. A horizontal alignment. When you talk about vertical, let me back up. That is vertical alignment. Horizontal alignment is each grade level. Vertical alignment is getting them ready from one grade level to the next. So maybe you would start in alignment by having conversations with your first grade teachers and your second grade teachers, and your second grade teachers with your third grade teachers. What are those gaps and those skills and mindsets and dispositions of students that are lacking when they get from one grade level to the next? That will help with your horizontal alignment. And most of all, Well, we don't want to teach to any assessment. We want to align how we are assessing our students with what we've instructed them to do and how we've instructed them to do that. Now, many people start with the standards themselves, but one standard encompasses a great deal of knowledge and skills. So that's where that deconstruction comes in. So maybe you guys have identified which standards you want to cover to mastery. You've prioritized those, but there has to be some conversation, and that can be done through PLCs, of deconstructing the standards into student-friendly learning targets. What are those learning targets for knowledge or skill that you can break a whole unit down into? That's very important for a teacher to adequately cover a standard and to address it. From there, and again, Lisa talked about how you might have to start that and then back up and go. So this is a cycle, but there's also opportunities for you to visit and revisit and go back and trace over your steps, because until it becomes an embedded process, you're going to struggle. Again, the conversation and doing some parts of that process are more important at the beginning phases of your work. But if it is possible to create pacing guides or unit frameworks, there's several principals with whom we are working that don't require lesson plans anymore. Rather, they have the teachers work in a quarterly overview if that's the way your school year is set up. So they know each quarter, but week by week, which standards and units will be addressed and covered, and the standards within those units. But you can do pacing guides. You can do unit frameworks instead of those lesson plans that have the essential questions or those learning targets spelled out. And when the teachers, if you just give them some kind of framework, maybe it's a template or some sort, and you just start there, have the teachers fill out what they are actually teaching, that becomes usable and tangible data and evidence to bring to the conversations for PLCs if doing horizontal or vertical alignment. And that helps the teachers to understand if they are assessing commonly, so that all students are meeting an identifiable need to go to that next level or to be ready for the next skill. As you go to the next phase, throughout, again, this is something that happens daily, constantly throughout a lesson. This is different from formative assessment. Every single classroom teacher has to implement some type of formal instructional process and progress monitoring, whereby both the teacher and the student, we have a whole separate professional learning for this. The teacher and the student both have some degree of responsibility in the learning process. So this formative instructional process allows the teacher to guide the students to address what they know, what they're supposed to know or be able to do, but they're also simultaneously teaching the student to understand that and to monitor their own progress and vice versa. If there is a great deal of progress monitoring, and if it is done well, then the teacher is able to give feedback to the student to make adjustments prior to moving on to the next skill. This takes practice and this takes time, but this type of formative instructional process really helps to identify for the teacher what kinds of gaps are happening in the instruction, which will help feed into the curriculum maps. Also, a student should never reach a chapter test or a unit test where they don't have the knowledge or skills to pass it. If they have been absent the whole time, then they probably shouldn't be given the assessment. But if you can give progress at the point of misunderstanding, progress updates and reports and feedback, the student can self-correct and be ready for the learning when the time comes. I mean, the assessment when the time comes. regardless, you will want to take the time, and maybe I see lots of schools start here. They identify the standards that are assessed in the summative assessments, and they take the time to look at the benchmark assessment data in PLCs maybe, because we don't have common planning time very often. That four-letter word, time, is critical. But instead of just random discussions in our established grade level meetings, we can have very focused conversations about the standards that are being addressed and how the students are performing on either the unit assessments, common assessments, interim assessments, or whatever other tools you're using to assess the students. Allow the teachers to collaborate and discuss the challenges they had with instruction. This gives the teachers an opportunity to learn from each other. And last but not least, every teacher and every school leader should support the teachers in adjusting what's happening in the classroom. Just like the teacher is going to give the student feedback for the student to adjust, instructional coaches, peer teachers, and leaders can give those teachers feedback, whether in groups of teachers or individual teachers, of how to grow and how to improve and how to increase student outcomes or improve student outcomes, and make sure that not only are they meeting the intended outcomes of the standards, but they're also learning to think, become efficient for themselves and effective for themselves in monitoring their own progress and determining how they should or how quickly they can learn and make some own adjustments for themselves. So we're creating a student-centered learning environment, but also giving the students some tools and resources in this manner to have some agency and responsibility for their learning. I'm going to pause for just a second. Rachel or Lisa, are there some comments in the chat that we need to address or questions? I'm looking at oh, go ahead.
Nope, you're good. I mean, we have had in the last couple minutes a couple questions or just comments. I think professional development is meant for schools that are focusing on mapping the everyday curriculum and aligning it to the state standards. This is not a STEM focused curriculum mapping training. And I'm right. No, this is not necessarily STEM focused, but you can absolutely do all of these pieces to connect with STEM as well.
So your STEM curriculum expectations are going to be very specific to your needs. Every school, every system, if you are from a charter school, a non-public school, you are obviously going to have some different expectations for your curriculum from your governing bodies. The process that is shown here should work with any of those. But if your governing body or your district or your state is not giving you a list of priority standards, then based on your student performance, you can determine for yourselves what standards or what needs to be taught as a priority from one grade level to the next, and to what degree. Are you teaching the standard to mastery? Are you teaching it for introductory purposes only? Can you use one standard? There's so many ELA standards that can be used across multiple subjects. You can use them in all the content areas of science, social studies, if you're a faith-based school, whatever your faith curriculum is. You can use those reading and writing standards to extract and extrapolate the information that the students have to learn and know anyway. One of the other things that I saw in here, oh, go ahead, Rachel.
We had another question about the difference between a pacing guide and a curriculum map.
The curriculum map is very general to what needs to be taught. The pacing guide might show you how long or you expect to spend on certain standards. And of course, how long you spend on a standard, and the pacing guide is sometimes part of the unit guide, but let's just say it's just pacing. If you're spending more time on a standard, that's probably because it's a priority and you are teaching it to mastery before you move on. So pacing guides help to really flesh out for a teacher and give them a general understanding that this is important. I need to go slowly here. I need to move quickly here. But it also helps your teachers to stay on pace. You're going to have those high flyers who teach very quickly. Rachel and I laugh all the time when we are using our curriculum to work with different schools and school systems, and several of our teachers and educators. She might move way faster than I do, but the content is the same, but our instructional style is different. So you want to be ambitious with your pacing guides, but you also want to be realistic. And to teach every single standard to mastery is probably not realistic. At every grade level. So you want to prioritize, and those pacing guides help the teachers to understand. And of course, you're not going to just put an arbitrary number of how quickly you should go through that. The teachers will help based on their experience of what's happening in the classroom to give some idea about how they should pace the introduction or the mastery, the teaching of the standards and the learning targets from them. Any other questions?
I'm answering some in the chat.
And
And
we
I
had-
I
we
see
had a-
There
one.
were a couple platforms that someone recommended they were utilizing. I mean, there's been questions about, what resources to utilize. There are so many resources around curriculum mapping. It comes down to, what is the best option for your institution and your team, determining which template you're going to use, which resource you're going to read together. You pick one, you go with it, you start wherever you are, as Lisa and Nicole have said, and move through that process.
I would love to respond to a couple of comments and questions about the pacing guide with the curriculum map. As you can see here at the bottom of the cycle, that developing those pacing guides is definitely part of the process. So we just, the curriculum is a culmination of a lot of work, and creating those pacing guides is part of that process, because if you are aligning it across grade level or even pacing guides that are kind of vertical, but mostly horizontal, then you want to have those so that you are ensuring that those key standards are being taught to all children. And then a kind of a follow-up to that is, let me find it. We're moving up. The review of the curriculum map along with the pacing guide at mid-semester and end of the year, is this recommended? Absolutely. Your structure, that's a great structure, because what you want to do, your curriculum and your map, it's for your children. And so you need to come together and determine where your children are in their mastery of the standards to determine, do we need to slow down here just a little bit? Or our children have mastered this already. We know it based on common assessments or checks for learning, and we can speed this up a little bit. That's very important to do. And then in addition to mid-year and end of year, if you have that structure in place where it's kind of an ongoing part of your work together as teams, that's even better. So thank you for bringing that up.
And Lisa, I'm going to jump in on that one as well. When you kind of monitor everything mid-year, many of our teachers, that is exactly one of the things that I did when I was assigned as curriculum coordinator. Every one of the teachers knew what standards they needed to cover. So I just had them actually just kind of tally every single time they addressed a standard and the learning targets within each standard. So we were able to see that some of the teachers were addressing one standard like 25 times. And I was like, really? Did they not master it after, 5 or 6? But then at the mid-year review, they realized when they were over teaching one standard, which is fine to review, but that just showed that they had time to introduce other standards. But then they also saw how many standards they didn't even touch by the middle of the year that were listed as priority standards for our state. And so they knew that they had to somehow in the second part of the year address those if they wanted to see student performance improve. And our student outcomes showed us that what the state had prioritized was in fact the same issues that we were having in our classroom. So I just think, and I saw somebody put, can you cover all standards in 1 year? And for arts, I'm not super familiar with art standards, and those vary greatly from one state or one district to the other, depending on if that has become an important piece to that school district. So the best thing to do is to look at your expectations of standards for an entire year, determine which ones are most critical for foundational learning so that if the students can build upon that learning for the next year, they might be able to transfer some of their knowledge or skills to the other standards. So the answer to that is no. I mean, yes, you might be able to cover all standards, but no, you don't have to. You need to give students enough knowledge and skills, like I said, that they can transfer to other areas, transfer what they've known to other areas. But when you prioritize, that's where it helps. That's where your pacing guides or unit frameworks, that's where a lot of that comes into play. And so that's the difference between a map. A map will tell you this is an important standard, this is a priority. It might give you all of the tools and resources, which include your textbooks, your websites, that help you to uncover. So a teacher doesn't have to rely just on a textbook if there's other resources available in that map. That map just gives a one-stop shop for teachers. I know what this standard is. I know the resources I have available. I know the assessments, if there are common assessments that I can use. And I'll know on that map if it's a priority or not. Whereas a pacing guide or a unit framework is specific to different units or when those things should be taught. Curriculum maps can be aligned with standardized tests, and they should be because many times state summative assessments are created or are using state assessment standards for assessing that grade level or a little bit above, a little bit below. If you're using curriculum-based assessments, that should be based on what you're actually teaching at the school. And yes, while you should align it to the state standards, it doesn't have to be the exact same.
We've got a question about, in terms of Cognia external reviews, what does Cognia expect and what tools are available to determine if we're meeting those expectations? So back at the beginning of today, we shared some standards that are connected to our accreditation reviews. So what we expect is that when you have that accreditation review, you can show your continuous improvement efforts in relation to these particular standards. So being able to share and show how professional staff members are implementing that curriculum and instruction, how it's aligned for that relevancy and effectiveness, what you are doing. There are some resources with your reviews that you can utilize to rate yourself on standards and see where you are with those particular areas. A couple other questions about specific resources or tools that Cognia recommends in creating and aligning with your curriculum. We follow that circle that Nicole has just walked through. That's what we follow and work with schools when we're doing professional learning on curriculum mapping. We don't have any particular external resources or tools that we as a whole recommend.
Rachel, I will say that when we are partnering with a school system or a school on curriculum mapping, we use the tools and resources that are available to them. And in some cases, we collaborate based on what they want to see and how they want the teachers to progress. So if they're using unit frameworks or pacing guides, we collaborate and help them design what they want to use in their schools. Yes, there is software available, but in many cases, it's very pricey. So the important thing is that you have very clearly, you know what you want to teach and how that's going to look in instruction and assessment because they're all aligned. And in another example, we do work with different schools in certain areas or on reservations, or maybe it's a faith-based school, or maybe they have very specific standards. When that is the case, again, we work with what is appropriate for their population and help them to create templates and tools and resources that outline all of these things for the schools with whom we work. Any other questions?
Several, I think you kind of answered some of them. There's several about, knowing which standards to align to, certain sets of standards. Again, when we support and work with our institutions, we help them look at those standards, determine which ones you're going to focus on. We know we have a lot of international friends on this call, and you have multiple sets of standards that you're aligning to and reviewing, and that can get really tricky. So having different conversations around that, we can offer support with that and what that looks like. Trying to see if there's any other big ones sticking out. We may have missed a couple, some asking for some samples of maps and pacing. If you
I
have
will,
those.
there are tons of examples online. So if all of you who are asking for an example of a curriculum map or different templates in order to put that information into a curriculum map, there are examples everywhere. So you can even Google math curriculum map for high school. You can, and when you do, you'll see all of these templates. We're hesitant to share because so many districts and states do require certain documentation. But if you just look at examples, there are some key pieces that, in my experience, are needed in a curriculum map. So if you kind of want to write these down, one, it would be the title, the grade level, the content area, and which assessments are being used, which data is being used to inform that map. Under that, I would say the standards, the deconstruction of learning targets for each standard, and the resources and the assessments used. Those are the key elements. If a teacher knows, if I'm a brand new teacher and I come to a school, I can pull a fourth grade reading map and know these are the standards I have to cover, the student-friendly learning targets, and I have all of these resources at my disposal. I'm not limited to those, but I can start with something in order to be able to teach. If you do have unit plans, then you can use those as well. And then as a teacher, I would know what units to teach. So what do you need? What are you missing? And I always think of it that way. I have new teachers. How do they know what they are supposed to address, teach, and assess in their position? Lisa, Rachel, anything else?
We had one comment or question about timeline earlier, and that there is no set timeline. It really, those resources that you have available to you, as in the structure to get the work, the time to get the work accomplished, and the process to be able to engage in this work. It is over time, and it is a process. So, and it's okay. I mean, if you're starting at the beginning, I would start at the beginning of this cycle. But by the time you get to your formative instructional process and progress monitoring and those common assessments, that may take a little while, but there may be some situation where you have structures in place that you can put teams together to, once everything is aligned, that you can knock some of that out and do it. Don't try to do it all at once. That the system that I shared the experience with, our goal when we worked together that summer was for teachers to feel confident and have what they needed for like the first month of school. Because then, when those doors opened, they were very confident in what they were teaching their children. And then the work continued to build out the year. And so you don't have to do the whole year cycle at once. You can do the cycle for your first 6 weeks or whatever your grading period is, or month or whatever. So that really is dependent upon you and your human and time resources and so forth.
I do want to cover a couple of things. So Lisa Lee, you have a question. What is the format if you have 2 days for science curriculum mapping? Well, in 2 days, I do think it would be reasonable to establish what all the standards are for science in each grade level, and maybe just kind of put them in a quarterly overview, and then you can flesh out the rest later. So you might be able to see which standards you want to address in each quarter. But that's as far as you will get. The other thing I would like to say, and in all of the situations that I'm working with, we do know that school leaders should be the instructional leader. In some cases, we find ourselves as school leaders being managers or firemen and putting out lots of fires. So if you are not going to lead this work, then you either need to designate lead teachers, department chairs, relieve some of their other duties to kind of guide this, or utilize your instructional coaches if you have some at your school, maybe not from the district, or some people find it's worth, and that's what our school did. When they pulled me on as the curriculum coordinator, that school decided that it was extremely important to have someone start the process. And over the course of 3 years, as the curriculum coordinator, I could give feedback to teachers and we could take those incremental steps and it didn't fall off the radar. So rather than just buy a software, if that's where you want to go there, but you still are going to need someone to be the champion for this large task.
Which takes you into today's challenge that we have for everybody, Nicole.
I would like to respond to just a couple of things. Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel, very quickly, because I know we have to wrap up. And I love your all's engagement, and thank you so much for that. I do want to go back to Nicole's, if you have the 2 days, please take the time at the very beginning for everyone to understand the process and the why. It's important for us as adults to know why we're doing something. So instead of jumping into the work, make sure everyone understands your process and why you're doing it. And then I wanted to respond very quickly. We've had a couple of comments about purchasing new textbook programs for next year. That is incredible. And there are fabulous ones out there. But remember, your textbook is your resource. You identify your key essential standards and what you want your children to learn, and you use that resource, that textbook, as a resource to teach your children. Okay, I'm sorry, Rachel.
So,
I know we can wrap up.
Yeah, go ahead. So if you look, think about everything we shared, and it was a lot. This is an hour long, and a curriculum mapping process is years long. So just based on what you heard, and think about the challenges you list, what do you think is the very first next step for you guys at your institution? If you'll share what you think you need to do, that would be great. Where will you start?
I'm
Some
grateful.
of you might just want to watch this several times. Put the
Wow, that's a
standards.
great set of takeaways. This is lovely.
We have another
Start
question
reading
about
on.
bilingual initiative standards. Every state also has their different ESL standards, and
Yeah,
I don't.
I put a note in the chat. We've had several questions related to state specific or international specific, and we are happy to connect you with some of our directors and in the specific states that have some more knowledge around either international or state specific questions and content or others that they can connect you with. We're kind of looking at that broad spectrum across all with this resource today.
I see some of you saying that you're going to prioritize standards. Some of you say you're going to start at one grade level. Some of you saying creating pacing guides. All of those are beautiful. And I say this all the time, it's not as critical where you start. The most critical thing is that you start. So you choose your very next step and you can go from there. Now, that leads us, just so you know, for many of our the people that I've been working with professional learning, and curriculum mapping has been very popular the last several years. It's hard to do this alone, and it helps to have a partner. So we're happy to help if you want that. And how can we support you? Rachel? Or do you want me to go through?
No, absolutely. Go for it. No, please. So this is our professional learning model. When we've mentioned several times, Nicole talked about who, different institutions we've worked with through that professional learning process. So that is an additional service that Cognia offers is customized, focused professional learning on topics of your choice and your need related to our standards and the work that we're doing. Curriculum mapping is one of those learning experiences that we offer. So we start with meeting with your leaders and really talking deep dive strategy and planning into what you need. Where are you in the process? And what is it going to look like as we support you? We can do that virtually, in person. We have some asynchronous work, lots of different pieces that lead into that shared learning of those next steps of where you're going to go with that curriculum mapping piece. We have an implementation plan that we utilize to drive all of the work that includes feedback and coaching as we go along to see what's working, what's not working. And we have a big reflection as we finalize that to see how this whole process can be and the continuous work that it drives. I think the next slide has additional resources, some questions. We've been asking lots of questions, so keep those coming in the chat. We can stay on and answer a few more of those. And I'm going to drop a few links in the chat as well. But here are some ways you can continue that conversation. So that Connect with Us is going to take you to a calendar with one of our team members, Amy McVeigh. You can schedule time with Amy to talk about curriculum mapping needs, any professional learning needs you might have, and how we can support those. That Learn More is going to connect you to our resources on professional learning to see all of the different options that we offer and that we can provide. And then we have another webinar coming up in a few weeks at the beginning of June that's going to be focusing on aligning data. We're going to have a panel on this one of some institutions that have done some deep dive work into school reviews and the work that is happening in their institutions for continuous improvement. Have some leaders are going to talk about that process and what that's looked like for them and how they have been able to make change at their institutions and drive some impact. I will let Nicole see if there's any additional chat questions we need to cover, and I'm going to drop some resources into the chat as well.
There are lots of you guys, and yes, you're going to have access. You're going to get a follow-up email that has a link to this recording, and you'll be able to see all of the things. We did get several questions about if we have a platform for mapping. We do not, but we do collaborate to help you get what you need based on your needs at your school campuses, whether you're using templates or things of that nature. We focus on process, and you can decide the product that is best for you, but that's a little bit out of our purview. But as you guys look at, and hopefully we'll be sharing the chat as well, I want you to see what other people are experiencing, because you are not alone. But I also want you to see where other people are listing where they're going to start. It is so exciting when we get to walk the walk with our peers and fellow educators. And we wish you the best of luck on wherever it is you choose to start.
Nicole, we did have a request to go back a slide, so they want to grab those links.
Oh, got it.
Perfect.
I will tell you that professional learning and curriculum mapping looks very different at every institution based on their needs. But that's why the conversation about what you need is most important. So, for example, one of our current partnerships is we've done professional learning with teachers to help them understand the why, but we're working with the leaders so that they can learn the skills to do this for themselves. It's whatever you need. And we're here for it.
We are. Thank you all so much. You will be receiving an email probably tomorrow with that recording and some follow-up information. And please feel free to reach out to any of us at Cognia to support you anytime.
Thank you for joining us, you all.
Have a great afternoon.